Dust devils danced across the parched landscape, mirroring the turmoil in Jedediah's heart. His ranch, once a thriving testament to his and his late wife Martha's shared dreams, now felt like a monument to his loneliness. The sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked earth, each ray a reminder of the relentless drought that had gripped the land for months. Jedediah was a man etched with the hardship of the West. His face, tanned and weathered, bore the lines of countless sunrises and sunsets spent toiling under the vast, unforgiving sky. His hands, calloused and strong, were capable of mending fences, wrangling cattle, and coaxing life from the stubborn soil. But since Martha's passing 3 years ago from the fever, the fight had gone out of him. He wasn't a young man anymore, though he still possessed a strength born of necessity. The ranch, named Martha's Hope, was all he had left of her, and he clung to it with a fierce determination, even as hope dwindled with each passing day. The cattle were thin, the crops withered, and the well was running low. He'd sold off most of his herd just to make ends meet, and even then, he was barely scraping by. Mornings began before sunrise, with Jedediah saddling his old horse, a reliable Appaloosa named Comanche, and riding out to survey the damage. Each day brought the same grim reality, a land slowly succumbing to the drought. He patched fences, cleared brush, and prayed for rain, his voice echoing in the vast emptiness of the prairie. Evenings were the hardest. The silence of the empty house pressed in on him, amplifying his solitude. He'd often sit on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the inky sky, remembering the days when Martha would sit beside him, her hand resting in his. He missed her laughter, her warmth, her unwavering belief in him. Now, only the mournful howl of coyotes broke the silence, a constant reminder of his loss. He felt adrift, a solitary ship lost at sea, with no land in sight. He was a simple man, a hard-working rancher, facing a future as desolate as the land around him, with little hope that things could ever get better. He just didn't know how much his life would change, and how quickly, when a desperate mother and her 3 little girls arrived at his doorstep. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, when Jedediah noticed a figure in the distance. At first, it was just a speck against the horizon, but as it drew closer, he could make out a wagon, pulled by a team of weary horses. He squinted, wondering who would be traveling these desolate roads at this hour. Visitors were rare, especially these days, and he felt a flicker of unease. As the wagon approached, Jedediah could see that it was driven by a woman, her face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Beside her, 3 small faces peeked out from under the canvas cover, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. He dismounted Comanche, his hand instinctively resting on the rifle he carried in his saddle holster, though he hoped he wouldn't need it. The wagon creaked to a halt in front of the ranch house, and the woman slowly climbed down. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, but her face was etched with worry and exhaustion. Her clothes were worn and dusty, but she held herself with a quiet dignity that Jedediah couldn't help but admire. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice soft but clear. "My name is Sarah, and these are my daughters, Lily, Rose, and Daisy." She gestured towards the 3 little girls, who were now huddled together, staring at Jedediah with wide, identical eyes. He realized with a start that they were triplets. "I'm Jedediah," he replied, his voice gruff. "What brings you out this way?" Sarah hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. We're in need of help, sir. We've been traveling for days, and our supplies have run out. We haven't eaten a proper meal in days, and the girls are weak." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I don't know where else to turn." Jedediah looked at the 3 little girls, their faces gaunt and pale. Their eyes, though filled with fear, held a spark of innocence that tugged at his heart. He remembered Martha's love for children, her dream of filling their home with laughter and joy. He hesitated, torn between his own struggles and the obvious desperation of this young family. He knew he didn't have much to spare, but he couldn't turn them away, not when they were so clearly in need. "I don't have much," he said, his voice softening, "but I can offer you some food and a place to rest for the night. It ain't much, but it's better than nothing." Sarah's face lit up with relief. "Oh, thank you, sir," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. "You don't know how much this means to us." Jedediah nodded, his heart feeling a little lighter than it had in a long time. He knew he was taking on a burden, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something about this encounter was meant to be. He just hoped he wasn't making a mistake. Jedediah led Sarah and the triplets to the small, sparsely furnished cabin. Dust motes danced in the fading sunlight that streamed through the windows, illuminating the simple life he led. "It ain't much," he repeated, feeling a pang of shame at the humble surroundings he was offering them. "But it's dry, and it's safe." Sarah smiled gratefully. "It's perfect, sir. Truly." The triplets, however, were less concerned with the accommodations and more with the smells emanating from the kitchen. Their noses twitched, and their eyes grew wide as Jedediah started a fire in the stove. "I've got some stew left over from yesterday," he said, rummaging through his meager supplies. "It ain't fancy, but it'll fill your bellies." He pulled out a pot of thick, hearty stew, the aroma filling the small cabin. The triplets' eyes grew even wider, and they bounced on the balls of their feet with anticipation. While Jedediah warmed the stew, Sarah took the opportunity to wash the dust from the girls' faces and hands. He watched as she gently tended to them, her touch filled with love and care. He couldn't help but notice the strength in her slender arms, the determination in her eyes. She was a survivor, just like him. The stew was soon bubbling on the stove, and Jedediah ladled generous portions into bowls for Sarah and the girls. He watched as they devoured the food, their faces alight with satisfaction. It was the first time he'd seen them truly smile, and it warmed his heart. After they had eaten their fill, Jedediah showed Sarah where they could sleep. He offered her his own bed, insisting on sleeping on the couch himself. Sarah protested, but Jedediah wouldn't hear of it. "You and the girls need a good night's rest," he said firmly. "I'll be fine." As Sarah tucked the triplets into bed, Jedediah went outside to check on the horses. He made sure they had water and hay, feeling a sense of responsibility for their well-being. He looked up at the star-studded sky, a sense of peace settling over him. He hadn't felt this content in a long time. Back inside, the cabin was quiet, save for the soft snores of the sleeping triplets. She paused, her eyes searching his. "We won't forget your kindness." Jedediah simply nodded, unable to meet her gaze. He knew he couldn't let them stay forever. He barely had enough to feed himself, let alone a family of 4. But for tonight, at least, he could offer them a safe haven, a brief respite from the hardships of the West. And maybe, just maybe, they could offer him something in return, a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had consumed him for so long. He banked the fire for the night and settled onto the couch, the image of the sleeping triplets and their grateful mother etched in his mind. The next morning, Jedediah rose before dawn, as was his habit. The aroma of coffee, however, was not his doing. He found Sarah already up, tending the stove, a pot of coffee brewing, and a simple breakfast of biscuits and gravy prepared. "Good morning, Jedediah." She greeted him with a warm smile. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to do something to repay your kindness." Jedediah was taken aback. "You didn't have to do that," he said, feeling a little flustered. "I wanted to," Sarah replied. "Besides," she added with a mischievous glint in her eyes, "those little ones have bottomless stomachs. We needed to use up some of your supplies." The triplets, still sleepy-eyed, wandered into the kitchen, their identical faces lighting up at the sight of breakfast. "Biscuits," they squealed in unison, rushing to the table. Jedediah watched them, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He hadn't seen his kitchen filled with such life and energy in years. He ate his breakfast in comfortable silence, enjoying the simple pleasure of shared company. After breakfast, Sarah offered to help with the chores. Jedediah hesitated, unsure whether to accept her offer. He was used to doing everything himself, and he didn't want to impose on her. "I can handle things," he said gruffly. "I know you can," Sarah replied, "but we want to help. We can't just sit around and do nothing." Jedediah looked at her determined face and sighed. He knew she wouldn't take no for an answer. All right, he relented. You can help me mend some fences. The cattle have been getting out lately. Sarah and the triplets followed Jedediah out to the pasture, their small figures silhouetted against the morning sun. He showed Sarah how to repair the broken fence, and she quickly proved to be a quick learner. The triplets, meanwhile, entertained themselves by chasing butterflies and collecting wildflowers. As they worked, Jedediah found himself talking to Sarah, sharing stories about his life on the ranch, about Martha, and about his struggles with the drought. He hadn't opened up to anyone like this in years, and it felt good to finally share his burdens with someone. Sarah listened patiently, offering words of encouragement and support. She told him about her own life, about her late husband, and about the challenges of raising 3 daughters on her own. Jedediah was impressed by her resilience and her unwavering love for her children. By the end of the day, the fence was mended, and Jedediah felt a sense of accomplishment he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized that Sarah and the triplets were more than just guests. They were helping him to rediscover his own strength and purpose. He still wasn't sure how long they would stay, but he knew that their presence was making a difference in his life. For the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of hope that things might actually get better. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone after all. The days that followed were filled with a kind of chaotic joy that Jedediah hadn't experienced since Martha was alive. Lily, Rose, and Daisy, despite their initial shyness, quickly transformed into tiny tornadoes of energy, exploring every nook and cranny of the ranch. Their laughter echoed through the once silent house, chasing away the lingering shadows of grief. The triplets were masters of mischief. One morning, Jedediah found his boots filled with wildflowers. Another day, his prized hat was perched atop Comanche's head. They even managed to paint Comanche's tail with mud, giggling uncontrollably as the horse swatted it back and forth. Jedediah, initially exasperated, found himself chuckling along with them. It was impossible to stay angry at their innocent antics. He discovered that telling them apart was a challenge. Lily, Rose, and Daisy were identical, from their bright blue eyes to their curly blonde hair. Sarah had cleverly dressed them in different colored ribbons, Lily in yellow, Rose in pink, and Daisy in blue. But even then, Jedediah sometimes mixed them up. The triplets, of course, found this hilarious, often switching ribbons just to confuse him further. One afternoon, while Jedediah was trying to fix a leaky roof, the triplets decided to help. They gathered a pile of rocks and began throwing them at the roof, convinced they could plug the hole. Jedediah, horrified, quickly intervened before they caused any serious damage. But even as he scolded them gently, he couldn't help but smile. Their intentions were good, even if their methods were a little misguided. Sarah, too, was kept on her toes by her daughter's boundless energy. She spent her days chasing after them, mediating their squabbles, and teaching them games. Jedediah watched her, marveling at her patience and her unwavering love for her children. He realized that she was not only a strong and capable woman, but also an amazing mother. The triplets also took a keen interest in Jedediah's work. They would follow him around the ranch, peppering him with questions about everything he did. They wanted to know about the cattle, the crops, and the tools he used. Jedediah, surprised by their curiosity, patiently explained everything to them, sharing his knowledge and his passion for the land. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lily snuggled up to Jedediah, her small hand resting on his. "We like it here, Jedediah," she said softly. "Can we stay forever?" Jedediah's heart skipped a beat. He looked at the 3 little faces, their eyes filled with hope. He knew he couldn't promise them forever. He didn't know what the future held, but he also knew that their presence had brought a light back into his life, a light he thought he had lost forever. "We'll see," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll just have to see." He wrapped his arm around Lily, pulling her closer. For the first time in a long time, Jedediah felt like he had a family again, and he knew, deep down, that he would do everything in his power to keep it that way. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah proved to be an invaluable asset to the ranch. She wasn't afraid of hard work, and she possessed a natural aptitude for ranching. She quickly learned how to milk the cows, tend the chickens, and even help with the more demanding tasks like branding the calves. Jedediah was impressed by her strength and her willingness to learn. He watched as she effortlessly wrangled a stray calf, her small frame belying her surprising strength. He saw her patiently coax a sick chicken back to health, her gentle touch soothing the ailing bird. He admired her resourcefulness, her ability to fix broken tools with whatever materials she could find. She also brought a sense of order and efficiency to the ranch. She organized the pantry, cleaned the barn, and even started a small garden, planting vegetables and herbs that would supplement their meager diet. Jedediah, who had grown accustomed to living in a state of organized chaos, was amazed by the transformation. One day, while Jedediah was struggling to repair a broken wagon wheel, Sarah stepped in and offered her assistance. Jedediah, initially skeptical, watched as she expertly assessed the damage and began to work. She used her knowledge of carpentry, which she had learned from her father, to carefully mend the broken spokes and reinforce the wheel. Jedediah was astounded. He had been wrestling with the wheel for hours, and Sarah had fixed it in a matter of minutes. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, his voice filled with admiration. Sarah smiled. "My father was a carpenter," she explained. "I used to help him in his shop." Jedediah realized that Sarah was more than just a pretty face. She was a skilled and capable woman, with a wealth of knowledge and experience. He began to rely on her more and more, seeking her advice on everything from managing the cattle to conserving water. He also noticed that the ranch was starting to thrive under her care. The cattle were healthier, the crops were stronger, and the well, though still low, seemed to be holding steady. Sarah's hard work and resourcefulness were making a tangible difference, not only in his life, but also in the fortunes of the ranch. He started to wonder what he had ever done without her. He couldn't imagine going back to the lonely, desolate life he had lived before she arrived. Sarah and the triplets had brought a spark back into his life, a spark that he thought had been extinguished forever. He still didn't know how long they would stay, but he knew that he wanted them to stay forever. He just wasn't sure how to tell her. He was a simple man, not used to expressing his feelings, but he knew that he couldn't let her slip away. He had to find a way to show her how much she and her daughters meant to him. He just needed to find the right words. And maybe, just maybe, he needed to find the courage to take a chance on love again. Jedediah found himself stealing glances at Sarah throughout the day. He noticed the way the sunlight caught in her hair as she worked in the garden, the way her brow furrowed in concentration as she read to the triplets, the way her smile lit up her entire face when she laughed. He was beginning to see her not just as a hard-working helper, but as a woman of remarkable beauty and grace. It wasn't just her physical appearance that attracted him. He was also drawn to her inner strength, her unwavering optimism, and her deep love for her children. He admired the way she faced every challenge with determination and resilience, never giving up hope, even in the face of adversity. He realized that she possessed a rare combination of strength and tenderness, a quality that he had always admired in Martha. He remembered the way Martha had always been his rock, his source of comfort and support. He saw that same strength in Sarah, a strength that he desperately needed in his life. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jedediah found himself drawn to Sarah's gaze. Her eyes, the color of the summer sky, were filled with a warmth and kindness that melted his heart. He felt an overwhelming urge to reach out and take her hand, to tell her how much she meant to him. But he hesitated. He was afraid of rejection, afraid of opening himself up to the possibility of heartbreak again. He was also worried about what Sarah would think. He was just a simple rancher, weathered and worn by years of hard work. She was a young, beautiful woman with a bright future ahead of her. What would she possibly see in him? He also couldn't shake the feeling that he was betraying Martha's memory. He had loved her deeply, and he couldn't imagine ever loving anyone else. But he knew that Martha would want him to be happy, to find love and companionship again. He just wasn't sure if he was ready to take that leap. As the days passed, Jedediah's feelings for Sarah only grew stronger. He found himself thinking about her constantly, longing to be near her, to hear her voice, to see her smile. He knew that he couldn't keep his feelings bottled up forever. He had to tell her how he felt, even if it meant risking everything. He decided to wait for the right moment, a moment when they were alone, a moment when he could express his feelings without interruption. He knew that it wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to try. He owed it to himself, to Sarah, and to Martha's memory to at least give it a chance. He practiced what he would say in his head, trying to find the perfect words to convey the depth of his feelings. He just hoped that Sarah felt the same way. He hoped that she saw him as more than just a friend, as more than just a provider. He hoped that she saw him as a man who was capable of loving her, of cherishing her, of building a future with her and her daughters. He hoped, more than anything, that she would say yes. The drought, which had been a constant threat, now intensified its grip on the land. The well, which had been holding steady thanks to Sarah's water conservation efforts, began to dwindle. The crops, despite their best efforts, withered and died under the relentless sun. The cattle grew thinner, their ribs showing through their hides. Jedediah felt a familiar sense of despair washing over him. He had faced hardships before, but this felt different. This felt like the end. He had already sold off most of his herd to make ends meet, and he had no other resources to draw upon. He knew that if the drought continued, he would lose everything: his ranch, his home, his legacy. He spent his days scouring the land for any sign of water, any indication that the drought might be breaking. But the sky remained cloudless, the earth parched, and the air heavy with the scent of dust and despair. He felt like he was fighting a losing battle, a battle against the forces of nature. He started to ration their food and water, knowing that their supplies wouldn't last much longer. He saw the fear in Sarah's eyes, the worry etched on her face. He knew that she was depending on him to keep them safe, to provide for them. But he felt helpless, powerless to stop the inevitable. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jedediah broke down. He couldn't hold it in any longer. He told Sarah about his fears, about his struggles, about his impending doom. He confessed that he didn't know how much longer he could keep going. Sarah listened patiently, her hand resting on his. When he was finished, she looked at him with compassion and understanding. "We'll get through this, Jedediah," she said softly. "We'll face this together. We won't give up." Jedediah looked at her, surprised by her unwavering optimism. He didn't know where she found the strength to keep going, but he was grateful for it. He realized that he wasn't alone in this fight. He had Sarah and the triplets by his side, and they were depending on him just as much as he was depending on them. He knew that he couldn't give up. He had to keep fighting, not just for himself, but for them. He had to find a way to save the ranch, to save their home, to save their future. He just didn't know how. He had tried everything he could think of, and nothing had worked. But then, Sarah had an idea. She remembered an old legend, a story that her grandfather had told her about a hidden spring, a source of water that was said to be located somewhere on the ranch. She had always dismissed it as a fairy tale, but now, with their situation so dire, she was willing to try anything. She proposed that they search for the spring, that they explore every inch of the ranch until they found it. Jedediah, desperate for any glimmer of hope, agreed. He knew that it was a long shot, but it was better than doing nothing. They had to try. They had to keep fighting. They had to believe that there was still a chance. The search for the hidden spring began in earnest. Sarah, remembering the details of her grandfather's story, focused their efforts on a secluded canyon on the western edge of the ranch. The story spoke of a peculiar rock formation, shaped like a sleeping bear, near which the spring was said to be located. Jedediah, initially skeptical, was soon impressed by Sarah's knowledge of the land. She seemed to possess an innate understanding of the terrain, pointing out subtle signs that he had overlooked for years: patches of unusually green vegetation, damp spots on the rocks, and the faint sound of trickling water. They spent days exploring the canyon, their hope dwindling with each passing hour. The triplets, surprisingly, were enthusiastic participants, their small eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of the sleeping bear rock formation. They turned it into a game, pretending to be explorers on a grand adventure. One afternoon, as the sun beat down mercilessly, Lily, the youngest of the triplets, let out a shout. "I found it," she cried, pointing toward a cluster of rocks at the base of a cliff. Jedediah and Sarah rushed towards her, their hearts pounding with anticipation. They saw it then, a large rock formation that, with a little imagination, resembled a sleeping bear. It was partially hidden by overgrown brush, which explained why they had never noticed it before. Sarah approached the rock formation cautiously, her eyes scanning the surrounding area. She noticed a small patch of moss growing on the base of the rock, a sign that there was moisture nearby. She knelt down and carefully cleared away the moss, revealing a small crack in the rock. She peered into the crack, her breath catching her throat. She could hear it then, the faint but unmistakable sound of running water. She reached into the crack, her fingers brushing against something wet and cold. "Jedediah," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with excitement. "I think I found it." Jedediah rushed to her side and peered into the crack. He could see it too, a small trickle of water seeping from the rock. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was proof that the spring was real, that there was still hope for their ranch. They spent the next few days clearing away the brush and excavating the area around the rock formation. They discovered that the crack led to a small underground reservoir, filled with clear, cool water. It wasn't a gushing spring, but it was enough to sustain their cattle and irrigate their crops. Jedediah was overjoyed. He couldn't believe that Sarah had actually found the hidden spring, that she had saved their ranch from certain ruin. He knew that he owed her everything. He looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and admiration. "You saved us, Sarah," he said softly. "You saved our home." Sarah smiled, her face glowing with pride. "We saved it, Jedediah," she replied. "We saved it together." Jedediah knew, then, that his feelings for Sarah were more than just gratitude. He was truly in love with her strength, her kindness, and her unwavering belief in him. He knew that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, building a future together on this ranch. He just needed to find the courage to tell her how he felt. In the days following the discovery of the spring, an undeniable shift occurred in the dynamic between Jedediah and Sarah. The shared hardship they had overcome had forged a deeper connection, a bond built on mutual respect, admiration, and a growing affection. They found themselves drawn to each other, their conversations lingering longer, their smiles holding a hint of something more. Jedediah noticed Sarah blushing when he complimented her on her cooking, or the way her eyes sparkled when he told her stories about his past. He felt a warmth spread through him whenever she was near, a feeling he hadn't experienced since Martha was alive. He knew that he was falling in love with her, and it both thrilled and terrified him. Sarah, too, was experiencing a whirlwind of emotions. She found herself drawn to Jedediah's strength, his kindness, and his unwavering loyalty. She admired the way he cared for the ranch, the way he interacted with the triplets, and the way he looked at her with such genuine admiration. She knew that she was falling in love with him, but she was hesitant to admit it, even to herself. Both Jedediah and Sarah carried the weight of past hurts. Jedediah was still grieving the loss of Martha, and he feared that moving on would somehow betray her memory. He worried that he wasn't worthy of Sarah's love, that he was too old, too broken, too set in his ways. Sarah, on the other hand, had been deeply hurt by her late husband, who had been a gambler and a drunk. She had vowed never to trust another man again, to protect herself and her daughters from further heartbreak. She feared that Jedediah was too good to be true, that he would eventually reveal a hidden flaw, a dark side that would shatter her fragile trust. They danced around their feelings, their unspoken desires hanging in the air like a tantalizing scent. They shared intimate moments, stolen glances, and lingering touches, but they never quite crossed the line. They were both afraid of risking what they had, of jeopardizing the fragile peace they had found. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing, watching the triplets play in the yard, Jedediah finally broached the subject. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice laced with vulnerability, I've been wanting to talk to you about something." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She knew what was coming, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to hear it. "What is it, Jedediah?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jedediah took a deep breath, gathering his courage. I care about you, Sarah," he said, his eyes searching hers. "More than I thought possible. I think I'm falling in love with you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Jedediah," she whispered, I care about you too." "But," Jedediah prompted, sensing her hesitation. Sarah looked away, her voice trembling. "But I'm scared, Jedediah," she confessed. "I've been hurt before. I don't know if I could trust my heart again." Jedediah reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. "I understand, Sarah," he said softly. "I'm scared too, but I promise you, I would never hurt you. I would never do anything to break your trust. I just want to be with you, to build a future with you and your daughters, if you'll let me." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with tears and a glimmer of hope. "I don't know, Jedediah," she said, her voice barely audible. "I just don't know." Jedediah squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with love and understanding. "Take your time, Sarah," he said. "There's no rush. Just know that I'll be here, waiting for you, whenever you're ready." Their newfound happiness, however, was not to last. A shadow fell upon Martha's hope in the form of a man named Bart, a ruthless rancher who owned a large spread bordering Jedediah's property. Bart had always been envious of Jedediah's land, and he had long coveted Martha's hope for himself. With the drought decimating the surrounding ranches, Bart saw an opportunity to seize Jedediah's land. He had hoped that Jedediah would be forced to sell, but the discovery of the spring had dashed his plans. Now, he resorted to more sinister tactics. Bart was also smitten with Sarah. He had seen her in town a few times and was captivated by her beauty and her spirit. He considered Jedediah an old fool and believed that Sarah deserved someone younger, richer, and more powerful, someone like him. Bart began a campaign of harassment, hoping to drive Jedediah and Sarah away. He started by cutting their fences, allowing his cattle to graze on their land. He then poisoned their well, forcing them to rely solely on the spring. He even spread rumors about Sarah, trying to tarnish her reputation and turn the townspeople against her. Jedediah tried to reason with Bart, but the rancher was deaf to his pleas. Bart made it clear that he wanted Martha's hope, and he would stop at nothing to get it. He even made veiled threats against Sarah and the Triplets, warning Jedediah that he couldn't protect them forever. One night, Bart and his men snuck onto the ranch and set fire to the barn. Jedediah and Sarah woke to the smell of smoke and the sight of flames engulfing the barn. They managed to rescue the horses and some of the livestock, but the barn was completely destroyed. Jedediah was furious. He knew that Bart was behind the arson, and he was determined to make him pay. He grabbed his rifle and prepared to confront Bart, but Sarah stopped him. "Don't do it, Jedediah," she pleaded. "It's what he wants. He wants you to lose your temper and do something you'll regret." Jedediah knew that Sarah was right, but he couldn't stand by and let Bart destroy everything he had worked for. He had to protect Sarah and the Triplets, even if it meant risking his own life. He decided to go to the sheriff and report Bart's crimes, but the sheriff was corrupt and in Bart's pocket. He refused to take Jedediah's complaints seriously and even threatened to arrest him for disturbing the peace. Jedediah realized that he was on his own. He couldn't rely on the law to protect him. He had to find a way to defend his ranch and his family from Bart's relentless attacks. He knew that it wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to fight for what was rightfully his. He just didn't know how much danger lay ahead and how much the Triplets would be involved. Unbeknownst to Bart, the Triplets were not just mischievous children. They were also incredibly observant and resourceful, and they had been watching Bart's every move. They knew that he was responsible for the recent troubles, and they were determined to help Jedediah and Sarah protect their home. One afternoon, while Bart's men were attempting to divert the water from the spring, the Triplets decided to take action. They knew that Bart's men were superstitious, and they decided to use that to their advantage. They dressed up as ghosts, using old sheets and flour to create spooky costumes. As Bart's men approached the spring, The triplets emerged from the shadows, their ghostly figures illuminated by the moonlight. They let out a series of eerie wails and moans, their voices echoing through the canyon. Bart's men, terrified, dropped their tools and fled in terror, convinced that they had encountered the spirits of the canyon. Another time, when Bart's men tried to steal their cattle, the triplets used their identical appearances to confuse and disorient them. They split up and hid in different locations, then emerged one by one, each pretending to be a different person. Bart's men, unable to tell them apart, became hopelessly confused and gave up their attempt to steal the cattle. They also started leaving traps around the ranch, using their knowledge of the land to their advantage. They dug pits and covered them with leaves, set up tripwires that would trigger buckets of water, and even created a series of false trails that led Bart's men into dead ends. Bart, frustrated by his men's failures, decided to take matters into his own hands. He snuck onto the ranch one night, intending to set fire to the house. But the triplets were waiting for him. They had anticipated his move and had set up a series of tripwires around the house. As Bart approached the house, he tripped one of the wires, triggering a loud alarm that alerted Jedediah and Sarah. Bart, startled, tried to flee, but he tripped another wire, which released a net that ensnared him. Jedediah and Sarah rushed outside, their rifles in hand, and found Bart trapped in the net, his face red with anger and embarrassment. They tied him up and dragged him to the sheriff's office, but the sheriff, still in Bart's pocket, refused to arrest him. He claimed that there was no proof that Bart had committed any crimes. Jedediah and Sarah were furious, but they knew that they couldn't change the sheriff's mind. They decided to take matters into their own hands. They released Bart, but they warned him that if he ever came near their ranch again, they would not hesitate to defend themselves. Bart, humiliated and defeated, slunk away, vowing revenge. But he knew that he had underestimated the triplets. He knew that they were a force to be reckoned with. He just didn't know what their next move would be. And neither did Jedediah or Sarah, but they were grateful for the triplets' bravery and resourcefulness. They were quickly becoming a family. The near-constant threat from Bart, ironically, brought Jedediah and Sarah closer. They had faced danger together, relied on each other, and witnessed each other's courage and resilience. The fear and uncertainty had stripped away their hesitations, forcing them to confront their true feelings. One evening, after a long day of repairing the damage caused by Bart's latest act of vandalism, Jedediah and Sarah sat on the porch, exhausted but resolute. The triplets were asleep inside, their small faces peaceful despite the turmoil that surrounded them. Jedediah turned to Sarah, his eyes filled with love and admiration. "Sarah," he said softly, "I can't imagine my life without you and the girls. You brought so much joy and laughter back into my life. You've given me a reason to hope again." Sarah looked at him, her eyes shining with tears. "Jedediah," she replied, "you've given us a home, a safe place to raise our daughters. You've shown us kindness and generosity, even when you had so little to give. You've given me a reason to believe in love again." Jedediah reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. "I know we've both been hurt in the past," he said, "but I believe that we can build a new future together, a future filled with love, happiness, and family." Sarah squeezed his hand, her eyes filled with a newfound courage. "I believe it too, Jedediah," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I love you, Jedediah. I love you with all my heart." Jedediah's heart swelled with joy. He had waited so long to hear those words, and now that he felt like the luckiest man in the world. "I love you too, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. More than words can say. He leaned in and kissed her, a tender and passionate kiss that sealed their love and their commitment to each other. It was a kiss that erased the pain of the past and promised a brighter future. From that moment on, Jedediah and Sarah were a couple, a family. They knew that they still faced challenges ahead, but they were confident that they could overcome them together. They had found love in the most unexpected of places, and they were determined to cherish it and protect it. They told the triplets about their love, and the girls were overjoyed. They had grown to love Jedediah as a father figure, and they were thrilled that he and their mother were finally together. They knew that they were now a complete family, bound together by love, loyalty, and a shared determination to make Martha's Hope a safe and happy home. They knew that Bart would likely continue to cause trouble, but they were no longer afraid. They had each other, and they had the triplets, and they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They had found love, they had found family, and they had found hope. And that was all that mattered. They were finally home. Bart, however, was not one to give up easily. Humiliated and enraged by his repeated failures, he plotted a final, desperate act of revenge. He knew that he couldn't take on Jedediah and Sarah directly, especially with the triplets watching their every move. He needed a way to strike at them when they least expected it, a way to inflict maximum damage. He decided to kidnap Sarah. He reasoned that if he could take her away, Jedediah would be forced to sell Martha's Hope to him in exchange for her safe return. He also harbored the delusion that Sarah would eventually come to love him, once she realized that he was the only one who could provide for her and her daughters. One evening, as Sarah was riding into town to purchase supplies, Bart and his men ambushed her. They overpowered her and dragged her away, leaving her horse to wander back to the ranch. When Jedediah saw Comanche return without Sarah, he knew that something was terribly wrong. He saddled his own horse and rode into town, searching for any sign of her. He asked the townspeople if they had seen her, but no one had. He returned to the ranch, his heart filled with dread. He knew that Bart was behind Sarah's disappearance, and he vowed to do whatever it took to bring her back. He gathered the triplets and explained the situation to them, his voice grim. The triplets, despite their fear, were determined to help. They knew that Sarah was in danger, and they were not about to let Bart get away with his evil deeds. They offered to help Jedediah track Bart and rescue their mother. Jedediah hesitated. He didn't want to put the triplets in harm's way, but he knew that he couldn't do this alone. He needed their help, their knowledge of the land, and their unwavering courage. He agreed to let them come, but he made them promise to follow his instructions and to stay out of harm's way. The triplets nodded solemnly, their eyes filled with determination. Jedediah, Sarah, and the triplets set out to find Bart, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. They knew that they were facing a dangerous enemy, but they were not afraid. They had each other, and they had their love for Sarah, and that was enough. Little did they know, Bart wasn't planning to simply wait for Jedediah to find him. He had a much more sinister plan in mind, one that involved using Sarah as bait to lure Jedediah into a trap that would not only cost him Martha's Hope, but possibly his life. The stage was set for a final, desperate showdown, a battle between good and evil that would determine the fate of Martha's Hope and the future of their newfound family. Jedediah, guided by the triplets' keen tracking skills, followed Bart's trail to an abandoned mine shaft in the hills. He knew that Bart was likely waiting for him, but he couldn't let fear stop him. He had to rescue Sarah, no matter the cost. He instructed the triplets to stay hidden, promising to signal them if he needed their help. He then approached the mine shaft cautiously, his rifle ready. As he neared the entrance, he heard Sarah's voice calling out to him. "Jedediah, don't come any closer. It's a trap." Jedediah ignored her warning and rushed into the mine shaft, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw Sarah tied to a post, Bart standing beside her with a gun in his hand. Well, Jedediah," Bart sneered. "I was wondering when you'd show up. I knew you couldn't resist coming to rescue your precious Sarah." "Let her go, Bart," Jedediah said, his voice firm. "This doesn't have to end this way. It ends with you signing over Martha's Hope to me," Bart replied, his eyes filled with greed. "Otherwise, Sarah gets hurt." He pressed the gun against Sarah's head. Jedediah hesitated. He didn't want to give up his ranch, but he couldn't let Sarah get hurt. He was about to agree to Bart's demands when Sarah spoke up. "Don't do it, Jedediah," she cried. "Don't let him win. Martha's Hope is more than just a ranch. It's our home, our future." Sarah had secretly been working on loosening her bonds while Bart and Jedediah were talking. With a sudden burst of strength, she broke free from the post and lunged at Bart, knocking the gun from his hand. Jedediah seized the opportunity and tackled Bart, wrestling him to the ground. They fought fiercely, each determined to win. Sarah, meanwhile, retrieved the gun and pointed it at Bart's men, who were hesitant to intervene. The triplets, hearing the commotion, emerged from their hiding place and joined the fight. They used their quickness and agility to distract Bart's men, giving Jedediah and Sarah the upper hand. Finally, Jedediah managed to overpower Bart, pinning him to the ground. He pointed his rifle at Bart's head, his face grim. "It's over, Bart," he said. "You're finished." He arrested Bart and his men, promising to bring them to justice. Jedediah and Sarah returned to Martha's Hope, exhausted but triumphant. They had faced their greatest challenge together, and they had emerged victorious. They had protected their family, their home, and their love. They knew that they could face anything as long as they had each other. They had found their happily ever after, earned through courage, love, and the unwavering support of three very special little girls. The drought might still linger, but their hearts were full. The drought, though still a challenge, no longer held the same power over Martha's Hope. With the hidden spring providing a steady source of water, Jedediah and Sarah worked tirelessly to rebuild their ranch, their efforts fueled by love and a shared determination to create a better life for themselves and the triplets. They rebuilt the barn, stronger than before, with the help of the community, who had finally realized the extent of Bart's cruelty and rallied to support Jedediah and Sarah. They planted new crops, carefully selecting drought-resistant varieties that would thrive in the harsh climate. They expanded their herd, breeding healthy and resilient cattle that could withstand the challenges of the West. The triplets, now more confident and responsible than ever, played an active role in the ranch's operations. Lily, with her keen eye for detail, helped Sarah tend the garden, ensuring that the plants received the water and nutrients they needed. Rose, with her natural affinity for animals, helped Jedediah care for the cattle, soothing their anxieties and tending to their wounds. Daisy, with her boundless energy and enthusiasm, helped with any task that needed doing, from mending fences to gathering eggs. Jedediah and Sarah were married in a simple but heartfelt ceremony on the porch of Martha's Hope, surrounded by their loved ones. The triplets served as bridesmaids, their identical faces beaming with joy. The townspeople who had once shunned Sarah now embraced her as one of their own, showering her and Jedediah with gifts and blessings. As the years passed, Martha's Hope flourished, becoming a symbol of resilience, hope, and the power of love. Jedediah and Sarah built a strong and loving family, raising the triplets to be kind, compassionate, and courageous young women. They taught them the value of hard work, the importance of community, and the power of believing in oneself. Jedediah often sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset with Sarah by his side, the triplets playing happily in the yard. He would think back to the lonely, desolate days before Sarah and the triplets arrived, and he would marvel at how much his life had changed. He had gone from a struggling widower, consumed by grief and despair, to a loving husband and father, surrounded by a family that cherished him. He knew that he owed it all to Sarah and the triplets, to their unwavering love, their boundless energy, and their unwavering belief in him. They had shown him that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, that even in the most unexpected of places, love can blossom. They had taught him that family is not just about blood, but about the bonds that unite us, the love that sustains us, and the memories that we create together. And as he looked at his family, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude, he knew that he had finally found his happily ever after, a happily ever after that was more beautiful and more fulfilling than he could have ever imagined. They had truly made Martha's Hope a home.